Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the incredibly complex and, frankly, fragile geopolitical landscape of June 2026. If you've been following the news, you know the Middle East is basically holding its breath right now. We've got this ceasefire framework in the Gaza Strip that was supposed to be a massive paradigm shift. But as we'll see, the gap between these diplomatic blueprints and the actual reality on the ground is just staggering. We're going to unpack exactly what went wrong here and why literally millions of people are caught in this seemingly impossible diplomatic deadlock.
Okay, let's dive right into this. So on paper, we have this comprehensive 20-point peace plan, and it's fully endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. We even had a highly successful initial exchange of hostages and prisoners. It really looked like a genuine breakthrough, and yet the region is teetering right on the edge of a wider war. So, what does this all mean? To understand why this framework is fundamentally paralyzed, we need to look way past the headlines and examine the structural contradictions built right into the agreement itself.
To do that, here is how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the 20-point peace blueprint, then the reality on the ground, the humanitarian gridlock, the disarmament deadlock, the governance vacuum, and finally, the massive regional domino effect. Let's start right at the beginning. Section 1, the 20-point peace blueprint, the expectation.
Introduced back in late 2025, this blueprint was really engineered to operate in very distinct sequential phases. Phase 1 was immediate action, stop the fighting, freeze the front lines, exchange hostages and prisoners, and surge humanitarian aid. Makes sense, right? Then Phase 2 focused heavily on demilitarization. Specifically, the verifiable disarmament of Hamas, completely synchronized with a sequential pullback of the Israel Defense Forces. Finally, Phase 3 aimed at transitional governance, bringing in a Palestinian technocratic body overseen by an international coalition. It's a highly logical sequence on paper, but as we all know, the real world rarely follows a clean script.
That brings us to Section 2, reality on the ground, the first reality check.
Now, what's really interesting here is that Phase 1 actually worked at first. 20 living Israeli hostages were released and 28 deceased were recovered. In exchange, 1,950 Palestinian prisoners were freed, along with 360 deceased returned. This was a massive operational success executed in early 2026. However, by completing this exchange, both parties basically exhausted their primary, tangible leverage. Once the trade was done, all the diplomatic focus suddenly shifted to the much more intractable existential issues of territorial control and disarmament. And very quickly, the illusion of a ceasefire really set in. See, the agreement relied on the Civil Military Coordination Center, or CMCC. This was supposed to be a U.S.-led 200-person enforcement team to monitor the truce, but it completely collapsed. European partners literally called it a disaster, and its leadership just resigned by January 2026. Without robust international enforcement, violence just became normalized. The battle lines, which were supposed to be totally frozen, turned into highly active, lethal friction points with constant low-intensity conflict from both sides. And this institutional failure bleeds directly into the physical geography of the conflict. The agreement originally established a static yellow line, which left the IDF in control of about 53% of Gaza. But instead of maintaining static postures, Israeli forces engaged in a calculated strategy of creeping territorial expansion, physically moving the concrete blocks westward. Ahead of this physical boundary is what's known as the Orange Line. This is an unmarked, lethal threat zone extending up to 500 meters forward. So as the yellow line inches forward, the Orange Line automatically swallows adjacent residential neighborhoods. Through this undeclared annexation, IDF control has actually expanded to roughly 60% of the territory.
Section 3, humanitarian gridlock, the collapse of New Gaza. When we look at the sheer scale of the physical destruction, it's absolutely staggering. 80% of all buildings in the Gaza Strip are either severely damaged or totally destroyed. That leaves 61 million tons of structural rubble. To put that into perspective, that is roughly equivalent to 15 Great Pyramids of Giza, just sitting there. And as of June 2026, only 0.5% has been cleared. Meaningful progress is physically impossible right now without heavy machinery and a stable security environment, and unfortunately, neither of those exist.
But this isn't just a logistical failure. It's deeply compounded by institutional obstruction. Israel strictly enforces a dual-use classification ban on goods entering Gaza. Basically, this means materials deemed to have potential military applications are entirely blocked. And this dragnet catches things like life-saving cancer treatments, water pumps desperately needed to fix the completely collapsed sewage system, and even basic cement and metal tent poles.
On top of that, 37 international NGOs, organizations that are historically responsible for delivering the vast majority of food and medical aid, well, they've been denied registration by Israeli authorities, creating these lethal gaps in the whole relief apparatus. Which brings us to this truly shocking number, $23 million. The UN estimates that rebuilding is going to cost $70 billion, but the Board of Peace has received a meager $23 million. You might be wondering, why such a massive shortfall? Well, major Gulf donor states have made it unequivocally clear that they will not transfer billions in sovereign wealth without a permanent political settlement. They simply won't invest in infrastructure that could just be obliterated in a renewed offensive.
Moving on to Section 4, the disarmament deadlock, the core bottleneck.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the competing demands sitting at the very heart of the gridlock. On one side, we have the Mladenov roadmap drafted by the Board of Peace. This demands full unilateral disarmament of Hamas within 250 days as a strict prerequisite before any Israeli withdrawal can happen. On the exact opposite side, Hamas entirely rejects this. Instead, they propose the Good Friday model. Inspired by the Northern Ireland peace process, Hamas proposes to lock and seal their weapons in depots under strict international supervision for 5 to 10 years during peace negotiations. Basically, they view disarmament as the end result of a peace process, rather than the starting line.
So, we arrive at an absolute deadlock. It's a completely paralyzing impasse built on existential prerequisites. Hamas will not surrender its weapons without a total Israeli withdrawal, viewing its arsenal as its only remaining leverage. Israel, conversely, will not withdraw a single soldier or allow reconstruction materials to enter until Hamas is rendered entirely defenseless. Neither side is willing to make the first move, because for both of them, it feels like political suicide.
Section 5. Governance Vacuum. Institutional Failures. Because of this deadlock, the proposed administration is totally fractured. The Board of Peace suffers from massive structural flaws and basically lacks broad international trust. Then there's the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, or NCAG, which is a group of 15 Palestinian technocrats meant to manage public utilities, but they are physically blocked from even entering the territory. Meanwhile, the International Stabilization Force has failed to deploy because troop-contributing nations have absolutely no idea what their rules of engagement are. And because these institutions are paralyzed, Hamas retains residual civil control in the 46% of the territory not currently occupied by the IDF.
The reason for this block is pretty explicit. Israeli leadership maintains absolute control over all entry points, explicitly warning the U.S. that introducing the committee would create a, quote, Lebanon-like situation. The current Israeli government fundamentally opposes any role for Palestinian Authority-aligned technocrats in Gaza, actively blocking them to ensure the territory remains politically isolated and administratively fractured.
And finally, Section 6, the regional domino effect, the wider lens.
So the absolute crucial point here is that a massive geopolitical realignment is currently being attempted over in Switzerland between the United States and Iran. This Memorandum of Understanding outlines a 60-day roadmap for de-escalation. It mandates a multi-front ceasefire across the entire Middle East. In exchange for U.S. naval concessions and economic relief, Iran has agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical choke point that directly dictates the price you pay for gas at the pump. The U.S. and Iran are essentially trying to build a giant regional roof over the Gaza conflict.
But that roof is incredibly fragile, primarily because of the northern front and Lebanon. This mid-June timeline shows exactly how delicate this whole situation is. On day 1, a Hezbollah attack kills Israeli soldiers. By day 2, Israel launches massive retaliatory airstrikes in Lebanon. Then on day 3, Iran immediately reinstates the Strait of Hormuz blockade, basically accusing the U.S. of letting Israel violate the overarching agreement. It took hasty emergency brokering by the U.S., Qatar, and Iran to implement a highly fragile renewed ceasefire in Lebanon by day 5. This just goes to show how incredibly quickly the entire regional architecture can unravel, simply because neither Israel nor Hezbollah are actual signatories to that overarching U.S.-Iran agreement. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. Will the fragile regional architecture established in Switzerland actually hold the region together? Or will autonomous proxy conflicts just shatter the Gaza framework entirely? Millions of civilians in Gaza are currently trapped right in the crossfire of this massive international diplomatic failure, waiting on a paralyzed agreement that demands existential compromises neither side will make. It's a deeply sobering reality, and definitely one we will continue to watch closely. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep asking the tough questions.